Alright guys, in this video we're going to be looking at a graphical display we call histograms. Histograms are specifically for quantitative variables, which are those variables that have those measurable numerical values. Okay. Here's our first example. So we have the exam grades of 15 students listed out here. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make what we call a frequency table of these exam grades. The way we're going to do this is we're going to first, number one, we're going to choose some intervals. Okay? Now, we don't list specific values out when we do a histogram. We choose intervals for values. Now, notice all of our data is two-digit numbers. Being that it's just two-digit numbers, what I'm going to choose as my interval is I'm going to choose to kind of count by tens, if you want to think about it. So my first interval would be my 40s, because my lowest value here is 48. So from 40 to 49. My next one would be from 50 to 59. My next one would be from 60 to 69. Then 70s. Then we would do the 80s. And then we would have our 90s. Okay. Now frequency is how often each one shows up. So we simply just go through and count. Now what I like to do is I like to mark them off as I count. So for my 40s, 40 to 49, I'm going to go through and I have 48. And that's our only one. So there is one of those. For our 50s, we're going to go through and count. We have 1, 2 in the 50s. Then in the 60s, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So we would have 4 as our frequency there. In our 70s, we have 75, 72, 71, 73. I skipped 79. So there's 5 total of those. In our 80s, we have 1, 2 in the 80s. So we write 2 for the frequency. And in our 90s, we have just 97. So there's only one value in the 90s. Now, notice here we have what we call relative frequency. Relative means related to the whole. Okay? Well, we know we had 15 students, so all of these values total should equal 15 if we add them up, and they do. So our relative frequency would be out of 15. So the relative frequency of the 40 through 49 would be 1 out of 15. For 50 through 59 would be 2 out of 15, 4 out of 15, 5 out of 15, another 2 out of 15, and another 1 out of 15. Okay. Now we could also list those as percentages if we want to, and that's perfectly fine. Okay. So our first step was to choose the intervals. Our second step we just said is to find the frequency for each interval. Which then goes here. Okay? And that's our frequency table. Now, we can use this frequency table to answer some questions about this data. If we look at question number 1, it says, what is the percentage of exam scores that were 70 and up to, but not including 80? Well, that would be our 70 through 79, which we had 5 out of 15 of those were between 70 and 79. Now, to convert this to a percentage, well, first I could just put this in my calculator and get a decimal, which you end up getting like 0.33 repeating. Okay? Which then, as a percentage, would be 33.3%. Okay? Now, what percent of the exam scores were at least 70? So that means they were 70 or higher. Well, that would include anywhere from 70 all the way to 99. So we would simply add up those three values. 5 plus 2 plus 1 out of 15, which is going to be 8 out of 15, which we could then punch that in our calculator and get our percentage. Okay, so let's look at the actual histogram now. Well, we have those frequencies and we have our intervals. So that helps us to draw and label our scale, which is our step 3. Our scale is here and here. Okay. You'll see it starts at 0. It goes up to 5, which is our highest frequency we had. And then we have our 0 to 50, 50 to 60, 60 to 70. Now, the next step, which I've already completed on here for you, step 4, is we draw a bar up to the frequency for each interval. And that goes here. Notice the frequency between 40 and 49 was 1, so that's why we go up to 1. For our 50s, we had 2 of those. For our 60s, we had 4 of those, and so on and so on. So you notice the bars match up with what we had in our frequency table. Now, the last question we're going to kind of look at is, how do I know what interval width to choose? Well, this really depends on the data. As you saw, our data in our example they were all 2-digit numbers, so going by tens kind of worked for us. If they were just 1-digit numbers, we might have chose a different interval width. It all really just depends on what you're trying to show and what data you're trying to show.